Hey everybody, welcome back, and today we're going to talk about the casting room. Now, the reason why we're doing an episode on the casting room is because really the casting room is almost a completely different environment from the film set itself. It is incredibly different in so many ways. But essentially what you have to keep in mind is that in the casting room, it's not the same as on a film set, and that you have to do everything you can to keep the people watching you just glued to you. Because in a film, they could cut back and forth. They know that what they're going to be looking for. They know that they can cut back to the other actress or the other actor in the scene. But when you're casting, it's all eyes on you for the entire scene. So you have to be completely in it. You have to find creative ways to keep them entertained. You don't want them to stop looking at you. Your ultimate goal in that casting room is that when you start, from start to finish, you are doing little things or just being completely in it to where they cannot take their eyes off the screen. If you do that, there's a really good chance you will be called back for another audition, perhaps a different callback, or it could lead you to the role. But, unless you're very just not what they're looking for, they might not call you back. But it's still important because these are all steps that you take to impress that casting director, to impress those producers, and to have them remember who you are. Because that is the secret to a career in Hollywood, is to have those people remember who you are. So let's talk about the casting room. It is probably one of the most intimidating phases for actors. It's a very intimidating process in general. It's very different from an acting scene. It feels very unnatural and very uncomfortable. And I could speak from experience here. I think all actors will agree the first time they go into a room where there's a camera and there's just people watching them, reading for them, it feels very strange to do a scene that might take place in the middle of winter, or in a car or whatever, right? You're driving on the road and you're like pretending to drive in a room. It feels super weird. I know. But that is just the nature of casting. And once you learn how to handle it, once you learn that it's not a big deal, that, they're not trying to buy that you're literally, driving a car, it's in that you're just there to put on a good character for them to see who you are and just to see your interpretation of the role, then you'll be fine. And that's essentially where you want to get to. And it's tough because especially when you start getting, final callback sessions with producers, with executives, and with the directors in that room, it's just really awkward because they're just all silently watching you perform. All of these decision makers who are going to decide if they want to give you the job or not are watching you and judging you. They're writing down notes. It feels really uncomfortable, I know. But also all the more reason to be in a really good acting class, because they will prepare you for all of this. Ultimately, this is why the process of understanding the casting room is going to be so vital for your success in Hollywood, because everything starts in the casting room. There's going to be very few instances in your entire career where you're just going to get a direct offer. You're not even going to have to audition and they'll give you the role. Like, that's just probably not going to happen for 99.99% of people out there. So what I want you to understand is that auditioning early on can be thought of as a numbers game. I know, right? I'm not saying it's quantity over quality, but what I'm saying is that quantity is super important, because in the beginning, when you are still fresh to the market, it's really important for you to be brought in as many times to as many casting studios as possible, because that is how you're going to build a relationship with the casting director. That is how you're going to start to put yourself out there for these casting directors to kind of know who you are, to recognize your headshot, to be like, oh yeah, I remember Sam. He did a really good performance and he's really solid at playing, teenage characters or, college student. So they're going to start remembering you. If they feel like there's a college role and they're like, well, last time he came in, he wasn't right for the part, but he did a pretty good job, they're going to bring you in again. And once you become more and more familiar with that casting director will begin to really understand what your brand, and I hate using that word, but in the beginning, your brand, your personality is what they're going to sell you on to the directors. That is the reason why you're going to get booked. And I'll get to that in a second, because we are going to talk about that as a big part of this chapter. But essentially, that casting director will really get to know who you are and will really start to push for you specifically for a part, because they know who you are, they know what your strong suit is, they know what your unique voice is, which is the most important part of first starting out. And at this moment, I would also like to address that, while casting directors are in many ways the gatekeepers, if you will, of your career in Hollywood, they are not the most important factor. I think you can think of them ultimately as like a wingman, if you will. What they do best is that they will introduce you to the real decision makers, which are the directors, the writers even, the executives, the studio executives, the financiers of the film, of the project. And what they can do is only to really advocate for you. But, at the end of the day, the casting directors are still people who are hired to work for the financier, to work for the studio. They still work under another boss who is, the real person running the show behind the project. So that's why those studio callbacks, those exec callbacks, those director callbacks, producer callbacks are huge. But it's important to realize that these casting directors, they're not the people who's going to give you a job, right? They're not your boss. No one is really your boss, because everyone is really your coworker. That's the best way to look at the whole career. That's the best way to break the ice and not to feel intimidated by anybody in the casting process, is to realize that at the end of the day, they are just other people in this industry who is trying to make a career out of this industry. They are your coworkers. They're trying to make money together doing what they love. So, what is the casting director looking for? What are they looking for when they're casting a project? Well, what they're looking for is the right person for the role. And by right person, I don't mean necessarily the perfect choice for the role, as in the perfect person for the role. I think what they're looking for is the most unique voice. They're looking for somebody who has their most unique take on it, because everyone is going to try to give them a perfect version of the role. But sometimes they're not looking for that. You're not going to stand out if you're giving them the most perfect read, if you're giving them the most perfect character that fits that, because they're bored of seeing that. There's going to be someone else who's going to do it better than you. But what will make you stand out is a unique, fresh take on it. How do you make that role only so that you can play it, right? And if you sell them on the idea that only you can play that part, then it's a no-brainer. They're gonna go with you. They're not gonna go with anyone else. So that's what your job is to sell them, and that's what the casting director is looking for. And when you submit to a casting director, when they're looking to cast a project, the earlier you or your agent submits to that project, the higher your chances of being called in are. Because most casting directors will spend their time calling in early submissions when there are still very few people that's submitting. However, later on, once they start to get more and more swamped with submissions, they're going to actually start to be very careful with who they choose, because usually they have a quota for how many people they want to call in. There's this project. Okay, we have about time to call in 40 people so that we can view 40 people, maybe 60 people in total plus self-tapes, right? Or whatever the numbers are. Well, the earlier you submit, if you submit within the first 10 minutes, that casting director just sent it out. They're waiting there on their computer being like, all right, well, what do I do? Oh, great, somebody submitted. Take a look. Okay, cool. He seems like, I don't know how many more people are going to submit, so let's just call this guy in. So you get called in, right? Versus if you submit later on and there's already 37 spots filled up, and now she's like, and now the casting director might be way more picky with who they want to accept because there's only 3 spots left. And remember from our first episode, the most important thing when you start is to just get called in as many times as you can. It doesn't matter if you're the right character for the project. It really does not. What matters is that you just get called in. You let them know who you are. You show them that you can act your butt off and that they should be calling you in over and over and over and over again. And another thing I want to address is that there's this misconception that networking with casting directors is like such a big part of the industry. It's so huge. And I will agree. I think that partially it's really important. But where I think there's that misconception is that you shouldn't get too caught up in just the networking side of casting directors. Because at the end of the day, what's really going to bring you in is just simply your acting ability and your headshot. You know, the stronger your headshot is, the more impressive your ability to act is, the more consistent you are able to perform at high levels, the more the casting director will just realize, you know, you are star potential, and they will want to bring you out here more and more and more, and even push for you for certain roles. So really, all the casting stuff, all of that, it doesn't really matter, especially when they don't really know who you are in the beginning. Networking is super tricky because you don't want to seem like you are trying to be friends with them so that, you know, you could have some kind of leverage. It doesn't really work like that. The best way at the end is just your acting ability. If you can act and just show them how good you are and do all the other things, you know, getting a good headshot, doing all of these things, that is gonna be enough to get you in the door and for a casting director to like you and want to work with you professionally. How do you impress a casting director? Well, let's go over the basics. So firstly, if you are still green to this industry, it's very normal for you to feel totally nervous and even blow your first few auditions. You know, you could blow your first 20, your first 30. I think I blew at least 5 where I just completely just butchered it, like nervously shaking as I'm reading the part, trying to keep it cool and play a role, just nervous. And at the end of the day, they don't really care because they're gonna keep bringing you in if they feel like you are a good vibe for the character, right? Or if they feel like you have potential. It's very normal for people to feel nervous, especially when you're first starting out and they bring you in for the first time and they've never seen you before submitting to their projects. They're gonna be relaxed about how they feel. You know, you could come in and you can give a good read. If you're nervous, they'll understand you're new to this, you know? But what's important though is to focus on how to improve and what is causing you to not improve or to be nervous or anxious, right? What's important is just taking everything, taking every failure, taking every mistake or any kind of experience and learning from it, growing from it. So now I'm gonna go through some tips for when you're actually in the room and you're doing the audition. Tip number 1 is to focus so much on your partner that the camera in the room, it doesn't even exist. It shouldn't even be there, right? Once that happens for you, your acting is gonna just really open up because I think a lot of people feel that that camera is recording their every move, it's gonna record what they're doing, and they start to get really nervous. They start to feel like someone's watching them, and it, you know, you make a mistake, then you get into your head and you're like, oh, the camera just caught that, the camera just filmed that, now it's gonna be on there forever, I ruined my audition, right? If you're just focusing on your partner so much, you're just trying to make a human connection with that partner, and that is all your focus is, the camera at that point doesn't even exist. And when you do that, your acting opens up and your acting becomes really, really difficult to not watch, which is the ultimate goal. And when you direct your attention to your reader, that means that your reaction is going to be more crucial than your lines. You know, staying focused on when you're not talking to your reader is going to be just as important, if not more important, in the sense that that could be your deal breaker. That could be the reason why somebody chooses you, is wow, they are so focused. It doesn't even matter what their lines are. They're so focused in the scene. They're so invested, right? You have to keep the viewer engaged. And the only way to do that, to keep yourself engaged, to keep them engaged, is to really keep yourself engaged. And to keep yourself engaged means that you have done your homework, you're off book, you've memorized these lines, you've really broken this down. Ideally, you've practiced this with somebody, your friends, you know, your acting partners in acting class, your mom, you know, your sister, your brother, anybody. You've practiced it so much that you understand the scene. It's not the first time you're doing it. That's a big mistake. When you walk into the audition room and you're doing the scene for the first time, it's not gonna be great. You wanna have done the scene a couple of times before you actually do it for real in front of the casting director. And when you're doing your audition, you really want to make sure that your words are sinking. Make the reader feel like they can understand your intention before you move on. You have to realize you can't fake human connection, right? You must connect with them. You must be invested in them. You have to look them in the eye. A hilarious story that I want to just quickly tell you guys is that when I first did one of my first auditions, for some reason, I guess I didn't really have like a reader. So when I was rehearsing the scene, I was doing it in front of a wall, like just in front of a blank wall, and I would do the scene. And when I went in to the audition, I couldn't look at the reader in the eyes. I looked at the wall because that was how I did it, and it felt so weird. And it was so strange, but that was how I practiced it. And even the reader was like, hey, it's not really reading quite right, but I like what you're doing here. Let's try to just, you look at me and then we play out the scene. And I was like, okay. I tried it and I did it, but it felt really weird. It felt like I didn't make a human connection. And of course, I didn't get a call back or anything. That was the end of that. But that just shows you the importance of making a human connection. Because when you're talking to a wall, you're not going to make a human connection. No matter how hard you try, your acting is going to be very surface level. But if you could look at somebody in the eye and you go through those emotions while looking at them in the eye, that is how it's going to really just sell, and you're going to really feel like you're connecting. And the most important thing that I want to talk about is to be yourself. If you don't give your unique, genuine reaction, then the casting won't buy it. If you feel like you're pretending to play a jock or pretending to be, frat guy or, tough business leader or tough biker gang guy, that's not going to translate. You really have to be yourself. You have to put yourself in the shoes. You have to say it the way that you would say it and not a caricature, right? Because they're just going to look through that. Someone else who is that person will do it better than you. So you have to make sure that you're doing it in your own voice so that, again, you're convincing them that your interpretation is what they need to go with, and only you can do your interpretation and no one else can do your interpretation. That's the selling point. And I've said this before, but casting isn't looking for the most perfect choice. They're looking for the most unique, and the only way to do that is to be yourself. You shouldn't be a character. You shouldn't try and be what is written on the page, because everyone is trying to be what's written on the page. But if you be yourself and you say the lines on the page, you're gonna have a very, very interesting performance. So what are some things you could do to kind of bring that out, right? Because it's easier said than done. Well, a fun exercise that you can do that I've learned is to kind of play the opposite of what you think is happening in the scene. Give them something truly unique. If the scene sounds like they're angry, play it off like you're not angry at all. You're saying these things, but you're maybe hiding it, and you're trying to hide it like with a smile on your face, right? That would create something very interesting. Take what's written on the script and just try and experiment with different emotions. Play it differently. Of course, not so different where it no longer matches the intentions of the script. That is where I think a strong scene analysis class will help you, is that you will have to understand what the core of a scene is. And once you understand what the core of the scene is, you can play the opposite emotion. You can play the opposite intention, but it still falls within the realm of what the writer is trying to accomplish. This is so important, but you have to remember it's not about the best performance. It is simply the most unique, the most different. Another thing to bring up is to keep in mind the costume or the wardrobe that you bring in for the audition. You should try and dress as close to the character that's written as possible. And to do that, you just have to take the subtle clues that you have laying around, right? If they're a high school student, you got to think back to what a high school student would dress as. If they're somebody who's in a meeting, right? The scene happens in a meeting. Maybe you dress up so that you're in that meeting. The point is, you want to make them feel like they can picture you in that role. And the best way to do that, the easiest way, is to just put on something where it is that role. And that way, if you come to the audition and they see it, they're gonna make that connection. They're gonna be like, yep, he's dressed exactly like that, and now he's talking like that, doing the scene. I could totally see him being that character. But again, you don't have to go totally overboard, right? Like if you're supposed to be a police officer, you probably shouldn't go to, Party City and get a police officer costume because it might look really silly. I know some casting directors just really don't like that. They find that very repulsive and they don't like that at all. Some casting directors don't mind. They have fun with it. And it's tricky. It's really tricky because every casting director is different. But if you don't want to risk it, which you shouldn't, the idea is just to be as good of an actor as possible because that's something they cannot deny, right? That's something they can't really complain about. So the easiest way is to just be as best of an actor as possible. And in those situations where you don't know, just dress as neutral as possible. No logos, plain shirt, simple colors, nothing to distract them just so they can focus on your acting. I want to conclude with some more tips that goes beyond the acting side of casting. So what might be even more important than making a human connection with them in the scene is to make a human connection with them as a friend, as a person in the industry. And what I mean by that is just, remember, the casting director, they are just another person that's trying to do their job, right? They are working in the entertainment industry, and so are you. So you really shouldn't feel like they are some gatekeeper that's going to offer you work or make your career. It's not really like that. It's more like they're coworkers. You guys are working together. You guys are in the same industry, working for the same guy, hopefully, right? So they're just trying to help you find the right role because if you're a good actor, they're going to want to see you succeed. But they're also trying to help the studio find the right actor that they're looking for. So it's a balance. And the sooner that you can realize that they're not in a position where they should intimidate you, and that at the end of the day, you're just trying to help them and they're just trying to help you, and they're trying to help the casting, and they're trying to help the casting team, the execs, the producers, it's all beneficial. And so you want to make that as pleasant as possible of a process as possible. Which means that, once you step into the audition room, you have to make the CD feel like they're your equal. They're just a friend. They're someone that you can be equal with. Nervous energy will subside if you just realize at the end of the day, hey, I want to make a human connection. This person is just like me. They're just here to work. They're not any more special than I am or anyone else, because at the end of the day, we're all working, right? We're all people trying to make this project happen. Also, no expectations. Do not ask for validation or expect any kind of validation, because it's all about confidence. You have to be willing to be seen. You have to command their attention, okay? If you don't believe you're the part, if you don't believe this role is you, then unfortunately, they're not gonna believe it either. If you don't believe that you are a star, if you don't believe that you can be a professional actor and that they're making a mistake not choosing you, they're not gonna believe it either. If you believe that, it's a mistake if they pass up on you because you nailed the role, they're gonna feel like that. It's gonna rub off. They're gonna genuinely feel like, wow, this guy's something really special. And so I wanna finally conclude, with that being said, that once you're done with the casting process, let it go. Just forget about it, Go and take yourself out, go get some ice cream, relax, take a break, and forget about it, because it'll drive you crazy if you don't. Having no expectations means having zero expectations. Otherwise, you might just lose your mind. Seriously, it will drive you crazy. So remember, zero expectations, let it go. If it happens, it happens. It's meant to happen. If not, trust me, they made the right choice going with someone else, because when you get your role, they made the right choice going with you. So you have to trust the process.